Hi guys, welcome to Monitoring and Evaluation Made Simple. I'm your host, Coach Alexander. Today we're going to be continuing on our quest to analyze the Sustainable Development Goals 2020 report. So over the weeks, I've been reviewing the first three SDG results, okay, and that has gone pretty well so far. But today I thought that we could start by reviewing the SDG number 4 on quality education. As usual, this video is quite long, so please take advantage of the timestamps that are in the description below so that you don't have to watch everything if you don't want to watch everything. Although I would like you to watch everything, but I know you're very busy sometimes, so you can just skip certain parts and get to the part where which interests you the most. Okay? So now let's get started. I'll be reading this report, this section, and remember each time we're reviewing this report, it's my first time actually reading this. Okay, so we are walking the path the first time, both you and I. Okay. Okay, so it says ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. Okay, so it says in the opening paragraph, despite progress, the world is not on track to meet 2030 education targets. Before the coronavirus crisis, projections showed that more than 200 million children would be out of school and only 60% of young people would be completing upper secondary education in 2030. Education systems worldwide have been hit hard and abruptly by the pandemic. School closures to stop the spread of COVID-19 have affected the vast majority of the world's student population. Disrupted education is adversely affecting learning outcomes and social and behavioral development of children and youth. Children and youth in vulnerable and disadvantaged communities are particularly at risk of education exclusion. The pandemic is deepening the education crisis and widening existing education inequalities. Okay, so we all know by now that the COVID-19 pandemic has hit everyone hard and including the schools. Okay, in most of the countries around the world, because of the COVID-19, schools have been closed for some time. Some are slowly reopening, guys, but generally speaking, that's how it has been. Okay, so really what we are seeing here is definitely telling us that the targets cannot be reached easily with this kind of catastrophe. Okay, so they're saying that before the coronavirus, projections showed that there were more than 200 million. Okay, and then they go on to say that they are not on track despite the progress. Okay, so definitely there's progress being made, but looking at the school closures and systems being disrupted due to COVID-19, we can already see that the progress is going to be slower than ever. Okay, so let's look at this. It says school closures worldwide may reverse years of progress in access to education. Before the coronavirus, the proportion of children and youth out of primary and secondary school had declined from 26% in 2000 to 19% in 2010 and 17% in 2018. Despite some progress, 258 million children and youth were still out of school in 2018, of which three quarters lived in sub Saharan Africa and Southern Asia. Girls face more barriers than boys at the primary level. Globally, around 5.5 million more girls than boys of primary school age were out of school in 2018. The disadvantaged girls face is more prominent in sub-Saharan Africa, where there were 128 girls for every 100 boys out of primary school that year. In 2020, as COVID-19 spreads across the globe, more than 190 countries have implemented nationwide school closures. About 90% of all students, 1.57 billion, were out of school. Although distance learning solutions are provided in 4 out of 5 countries with school closures, at least 500 million children and youth are currently excluded from these options. The sheer magnitude of school closures is likely to set back progress on access to education. Okay, so this one is really self-explanatory. I don't have to explain what we've just read, but maybe I can just touch a bit on Africa and Asia. You have to admit that these are the continents that are really being hit hard by the COVID, but also where the results are not so good. So we already know the situation in these continents, but the question we would be asking is, this has been a phenomenon that has been existing for a very long time. So clearly, countries need to take action because this will just continue. We'll continue to have poor results from sub-Saharan Africa and Asia. But what is also so sad is that the girl child is always, I mean, the opposite sex. I mean, the females are always the ones who are in problems, okay? And this is despite the many women empowerment programs, the sensitization of equal rights. We still see this as a major problem, okay? So something has to change. I don't have the answers or recommendations. These people have the data. So there's obviously something that needs to be done here, guys, okay? Okay, let's go on and let's read further. Okay, so it says without remedial action, the effects of COVID-19 will only add to the obstacles faced by poor children in completing their education. Goal 4 aims to keep children in school and ensure they complete their education. The global primary school completion rate was estimated at 85% in 2019, up from 70% in 2000. Okay, the lower and upper secondary school rates were 73% and 49% respectively, with large disparities among population groups. For example, in low-income countries, the primary completion rate is 34% for children from the poorest 20% of households and 79% for children from the richest 20% of households. Okay. Well, so what do you take of that, guys? This is where I always have a challenge, but it's good they've brought this out because generalizing, you say globally, primary school completion rate was estimated at 55%. But then you have a huge gap between the richest and the poorest of nations. So there must be a way we can try to report these things in a way that we really get the true picture. Because if you say globally, then what we are saying globally is that things are okay in terms of completion rate. But look at this, the low income countries, the poorest countries are really being hard hit. Okay. So I don't know again what the solution could be, or maybe I've got it all wrong because here there's a graph. High income countries 94%, poorest 20%, richest 20%. Okay, what does this all mean? Low income countries. Okay, richest 20%, poorest 20%. Okay. Anyway, I guess you can have time to analyze this thing, but already I can see that the low income countries definitely are not really doing that fine. Okay, but let's see. Okay, let's go on to the next part. Okay, so it says remote learning remains out of reach for most students in the poorest countries. Okay, during the COVID-19 pandemic, many schools are offering remote learning to students through virtual classrooms to mitigate the impact of school closures. While this is an option for some, it is out of reach for many. Lack of access to computers and the internet at home, as well as low level of computer related skills, put many already marginalized students at a further disadvantage. In 2019, around 87% of households in Europe had internet access at home, compared with 18% of those in Africa. Okay, so you can already see that even with the COVID, the richest countries, or at least those countries with access to internet, are able to undertake online learning. But it's completely different in Africa. As we can see there, that only 2 out of 10 African families have access to internet in their homes. Okay, so now this is a big problem, because if the COVID-19 is going to continue, of course there are talks that the vaccine will be out maybe in October, November, December, but the first people who are going to access that vaccine are obviously the richest of the rich. But then, looking at the other countries around the world, they'll have access to that vaccine quite all right. The time will come, but at what point? Okay. So, in the meantime, people will not really be learning, or governments in these poor nations will just be forced to reopen the schools. Okay. So, we can really see that digitalization worldwide is critical, and there must be a way in which this huge gap can this huge gap can be at least mended. The thing is that one thing you have to realize, guys, is that Africa is rich in resources. So there must be a way in which priorities should change. If it's education, what can we do to ensure that our children globally have access to education? Okay, so it goes on to say school closures create added risks for the health and safety of vulnerable children. For millions of children around the world, school is not only a place to learn, it's also a safe place removed from violence, where they can receive free meals, health, nutrition service such as vaccination, deworming, and iron supplementation. Very, very true, guys. And it's really sad that the schools have closed, you know? It's actually a gateway to these children not only receiving learning, but also the nutrition. And it's sad to say that not everyone who goes to school, not every child who goes to school is coming from a family that is stable. Okay. And because the school system is kind of subsidized sometimes by the government, school children can receive and access these things. But what are we saying when we have this school closed? So they're saying that an estimated 379 million children missed out on school meals because of school closures during the pandemic. So if you look at this school closure is actually contributing negatively to the SDG goal of removing hunger and poverty globally. Because 379 million children missing out a meal, it's sad. I've been hungry before. Okay. And you know how it feels when you get hungry. I mean, we all have gotten hungry, but for a child to be hungry, it isn't right. So there must be something that should be done. As studies from previous crises show, school closures and the economic downturn caused by COVID may also increase rates of violence against children, child labor, child marriage, and early pregnancies. Wow. Okay, so you can already feel that our hearts are bleeding to see that school closure is actually not good, not at all good. We look at it in terms of just learning, but there are also other indirect things that can come as a result of having these schools closed. Okay, this is the last section. Lack of basic infrastructure in schools, such as hand washing facilities, will make recovery from COVID-19 more difficult. Lack of basic hand washing facilities in many schools around the world means that teachers and students do not enjoy a safe learning environment. In areas where schools are closed because of the pandemic, it also means that they will be unable to practice essential hygiene measures when they go back to school. According to latest available data, only 65% of primary schools worldwide have basic hand washing facilities. The proportion is slightly higher for lower secondary and upper secondary schools. Of all regions, sub-Saharan Africa faces the biggest challenges with basic hand washing facilities in only 38% of primary schools and 43% of upper secondary. Many schools also lack other basic resources such as electricity, clean drinking water, computers, internet access. Globally, 89% of upper secondary schools have access to electricity. Those in sub-Saharan Africa are the most disadvantaged. Only 57% of upper secondary schools have access to electricity, 55% to drinking water, 41% to computers, and 24% to the internet. One important step towards the goal of quality education for all is getting enough trained teachers in classrooms. The latest data shows that 85% of primary school teachers and 86% of secondary school teachers worldwide receive the minimum required training. Sub-Saharan Africa has the lowest percentage of trained teachers, 64% at the primary school and 50% at the secondary school. Okay, so this is the end of the report, guys. So in summary, in conclusion, what can we say? Well, there has been progress, but it's not the progress we want, okay? And it's become worse and complicated with the coming in of the COVID-19 pandemic, okay? Obviously, from this report, we can see that the girl child, the girls are much more disadvantaged than the boys out of this. But also, with the closure of schools, there are indirect negative implications to all of this because we see that many may not have access to meals, may not have access to vaccination facilities because this is all done through the schools. And you also discover that because of this, some of the children will be more prone to violent acts, they will be prone to the early child marriages, okay, and possibly hunger. And this is a very serious and sad development. So, what are we saying here? I think from the look of things, Sub Saharan Africa and Asia are the worst hit in all of this. From what I read right now, it looks like Africa is actually lagging behind big time. So, we really need to work hard, I guess. Globally, there has to be something that should be done to bridge this gap, and it needs a global effort. If it's Africa, Africa needs a continental effort to solve this problem. So, give me your thoughts on this review of the SDG for quality education, and let me know your thoughts. I'll be continuing to review the next SDG SDGs. Okay, we'll review them together, get to know the results. So until we meet again, I've been your host, Coach Alexander. See you on the other side. Bye.